Jonas was born in darkness. He had never seen the sun or the open sky. All he knew was the endless maze of corridors and factories that made up his hive city. The hive was like a metal mountain full of pipes and tunnels, each level stacked on top of the other. Billions of people lived in these towers of concrete and steel. They were born in tiny cells, worked in huge manufactorums, and died without anyone outside ever noticing. WH40K.LEXICANUM.com. Everyone here was a number, a cog in the massive machine that kept the Imperium running. Jonas's number was 247F. It was stamped on his ration card and carved into the bunk above his sleeping mat. Every morning, long before any natural light would have appeared outside, a loud siren wailed through the hab blocks. The sound shook the thin metal walls and jolted Jonas awake. He scrambled to dress in his stained overalls and tie his boots. He didn't own much, just his clothes, a small tin cup for water, and a worn picture of his mother and him. His mother, Anna, worked in the same factory, but on a different shift. He rarely saw her awake. Their lives overlapped by a few minutes when one shift ended and the other began. Those moments were precious. They hugged quickly and whispered promises that someday, somehow, things would get better. Jonas's block was a long metal hallway lined with identical doors. Each door opened into a tiny room with bunks stacked 3 high. At the end of the hall, a set of stairs led to the factory entrance. The factory itself was enormous. It hummed and throbbed with the weight of its machines. Conveyors carried heavy loads of ore and chemicals. Giant vats bubbled with mixtures that would become food or fuel. Steam hissed from broken pipes. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of oil. Workers moved like ants, each one performing a repetitive task. Overseers with shock batons and rebreathers stood on catwalks above, watching for mistakes. If someone moved too slowly or looked away, the overseer would press a button on their baton and send a bolt of electricity down to the worker. Jonas worked at the protein vats. His job was to monitor the temperature and consistency of the synthetic food being brewed. It was dull but dangerous. If the mixture overheated, it could explode. If it got too cold, it would spoil, and the entire batch would be wasted. Whenever he had a free moment, Jonas would sneak a look over at Lysa. She worked one vet down from him. Lysa was the same age as Jonas, maybe a year younger. Her hair was always tied back, and her face was smudged with grime. But her eyes were bright and curious. The two had grown up together, playing hide and seek in the corridors as children and then working side by side as teenagers. They communicated in quick glances and subtle gestures because talking on the factory floor was forbidden. During their midday break, Jonas and Lysa sat on the metal floor, backs pressed against a warm pipe. They pulled nutrient bars from their pockets and chewed in silence. After a moment, Lysa whispered, "Have you heard the rumors?" Her voice was barely audible over the hum of the machines. Jonas shook his head. "About what?" Lysa leaned in. "They say the Imperial Guard is coming. The planet's governor has to send a regiment to the front. They're taking people from every block. They might come for us." Jonas felt his stomach clench. He had heard stories about conscription. The Imperial Guard needed endless numbers of soldiers. Planetary governors met their quotas by pulling names at random. Once taken, conscripts seldom returned. "Maybe they won't take us," Jonas muttered, trying to sound calm. Lysa shrugged. Maybe not. My uncle was drafted last year. He never came back. I'm scared, Jonas." She squeezed his hand quickly before an overseer looked their way. Jonas wanted to reassure her, but he couldn't. He was scared too. The rumors spread quickly. People whispered in the corridors, in the queues for water, even in the shared latrines. The whisper became a rumor, and the rumor grew into a dread that hung over the entire block. Jonas's mother spoke to him one night as she prepared to leave for her shift. "If they call your name, you must go," she said, her voice trembling. "If you don't, they will punish our entire block. They will punish me and everyone else. Promise me you will go if they take you." Jonas looked into her eyes and saw fear. He nodded. "I promise," he said. He didn't tell her about the note he was writing. He didn't tell her about the plan forming in his head. That night, Jonas wrote a letter on a piece of cloth he had torn from an old shirt. He wrote, "I love you. If I have to leave, remember I tried to stay. I'll come back if I can." He folded the cloth and slipped it into his boot. He planned to give it to Lysa in case he was taken. Writing the note made him feel better. It gave him a small sense of control over the situation. The next morning was different. Jonas woke not to the usual siren, but to the sound of marching boots. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. Shadows moved under the door. People muttered and prayed. Jonas's heart hammered. He sat up and grabbed his note, holding it tightly. The door burst open, and 2 soldiers in gray cloaks and flak armor entered. Behind them, a tall figure in a long black coat and hat stood in the doorway. His coat was decorated with medals. A scar ran down his cheek. He held a power sword at his side and a bolt pistol on his hip. The symbol of a stylized eagle, the double-headed aquila, was emblazoned on his cap. Jonas knew instantly that this man was a commissar. The commissar glanced around the room, his eyes cold and calculating. He pulled out a data slate and read aloud. Block 17, Section C, Row 320 bodies. If I call your number, step forward. He began calling numbers. Each number was a person. One by one, the conscripts stepped forward, shaking and pale. Jonas's hands sweated. He tried to blend into the shadows. Number 247F, the commissar called. Jonas felt a jolt. That was his number. He hesitated. Lysa's fingers brushed his hand. Be strong, she whispered. Jonas squeezed her hand and then stepped forward. The soldiers grabbed him and pushed him into a line with the others. Jonas's mother arrived, her face white. She threw herself at the commissar's feet, begging. Take me instead, she cried. Don't take my boy. The commissar didn't even look at her. He nudged her aside with his boot. The emperor needs your son, not you, he said. His voice was like ice. If he resists, I will shoot him here, and you will watch him die. Jonas's mother sobbed. Jonas wanted to hug her, to promise he would return, but the soldiers pushed him forward. He caught one last glimpse of her tear-stained face before he was marched away. The weight of his promise crushed him. The first chapter sets the stage by immersing the reader in the oppressive environment of the hive and the looming fear of conscription. It uses simple language and vivid details to make the world feel real. The hook comes at the end when Jonas is taken away from his mother. The reader is left wondering what will happen next and how Jonas will respond to this situation. The conscripts from Block 17, including Jonas, were taken to a central holding area in the hive. It was a large open space with metal walls and a high ceiling. The floor was marked with numbered squares, each just big enough for one person to stand on. The conscripts were shoved into these squares and told not to move. Bright lights shone down, making it hard to see into the shadows beyond. Jonas could feel sweat trickling down his back. He glanced around and saw Lysa standing several rows away. Their eyes met, and they exchanged a silent promise, survive. A few minutes later, the commissar entered again, accompanied by several soldiers and a scribe. The scribe held a large parchment scroll. The commissar began calling names and numbers. Each name he called was checked off on the scroll. As he read, the soldiers moved through the rows, attaching metal tags to the necks of the conscripts. Each tag contained their name, number, and hive designation. Jonas felt the cold metal against his skin. It made the situation feel more permanent. He was no longer just Jonas. He was now recruit 247F, Hive J17. After the tagging, the conscripts were herded into an elevator. The elevator was massive, large enough to fit an entire squad of soldiers and their gear. It creaked and groaned as it descended. Jonas had never seen an elevator like this. The elevators he knew carried ore and waste. This one carried people to their fate. As they descended, the air grew cooler and fresher. Jonas realized they were leaving the hot, polluted air of the lower hive and moving into a part of the hive he had never seen. When the elevator doors opened, Jonas stepped out onto a platform overlooking a huge cavern. The cavern was open to the outside. For the first time in his life, Jonas saw the sky. It wasn't a clear blue sky. It was a dirty yellow, stained by smog and smoke from other hives, but it was still the sky. Jonas gasped. He could see the outlines of distant hive cities and the barren wasteland between them. He could feel wind on his face. It was cold and sharp. He shivered. Transport trucks waited on the platform, engines rumbling. The conscripts were shoved onto the trucks. Jonas found himself in a truck with 12 other recruits. Lysa was not with him. She had been loaded onto another vehicle. Jonas's heart sank, but he tried to stay calm. He didn't want to show fear in front of the others. Many of the conscripts were younger than Jonas. Some looked like they had never seen a day of work. They clutched their tags and looked around wide-eyed. Jonas recognized a boy from the vat floor who always sang to himself during breaks. Now he was silent, tears streaming down his face. The trucks drove for hours. They passed through broken landscapes filled with jagged rocks and pools of toxic sludge. Occasionally, Jonas saw the remains of old war machines half buried in the dirt. These relics reminded him that his planet had been a battlefield for centuries. The Imperium fought endless wars here, not just on other worlds. He wondered how many people had died on this very ground eventually. The convoy arrived at a large complex surrounded by a fence topped with razor wire. Towers with heavy stubbers watched over the entrance. A sign above the gate read Imperial Recruitment Center Zone 6. Jonas and the others were ordered out of the trucks. They were lined up and marched through the gate. Inside, they found rows of barracks, drill fields, and a tall building with the aquila on its roof. This was where they would be trained. They were taken into a processing hall where servitors, a mix of human and machine, stood ready. Each conscript was stripped of their old clothes, scrubbed down with harsh chemicals, and given a simple green uniform. Their heads were shaved. A Medicae officer checked their teeth and eyes, marked those who were sick or injured, and injected everyone with booster shots to protect them from diseases. Jonas felt like an animal being prepared for sale. After processing, the recruits were divided into squads of 10 and assigned to barracks. Jonas was placed with Milo, a boy he had met on the truck. Milo was talkative and optimistic. He had always dreamed of seeing the stars, and even though he was scared, he tried to look on the bright side. At least we get 3 meals a day now, he joked. Jonas forced a smile. He didn't want to crush Milo's optimism, but he couldn't share it. His mind was still on Lysa and his mother. The first night in the barracks was sleepless. The recruits lay on hard cots, listening to the sounds of footsteps and muffled voices outside. The air smelled of oil, disinfectant, and fear. Jonas closed his eyes and thought about home. He remembered the taste of the nutrient bars, the warmth of the pipes, and the softness of his mother's hug. He wondered if he would ever feel safe again. In the morning, the real training began. The recruits were shaken awake by a drill sergeant who roared, "Up! Line up outside now!" They stumbled out of the barracks into the cold. The sergeant, a tall woman with scars on her face, paced up and down the line. "I am Sergeant Dallas," she said. "You are no longer factory workers. You are recruits for the Imperial Guard. You will listen to my orders, and you will follow them without question. If you do not, you will be punished." The recruits learned how to march in formation, how to hold a laskin properly, how to stand at attention, and how to clean their weapons. They learned the Imperial Creed, the prayer that soldiers recite before battle. "We march for the Emperor," they repeated in unison. "In his name, we fight. In his name, we die." Jonas said the words but felt no connection to them. He repeated them because he had to, not because he believed. During weapons training, the recruits were taken to a firing range. Targets shaped like human silhouettes popped up at varying distances. The recruits were taught to aim for the center mass, conserve ammunition, and work in teams. Jonas was not a natural marksman, but he practiced until his shots hit their marks. Milo was better. He could hit targets at long range without missing. "If this war is just shooting at wooden boards, we'll be fine," he joked. Jonas smiled, grateful for the brief moment of levity. Physical training followed weapons training. The recruits ran laps around the drill field until their lungs burned. They practiced crawling under barbed wire, scaling walls, and carrying heavy packs. Sergeant Dallas pushed them hard. "The enemy will not wait for you to catch your breath," she yelled. "You must be stronger. You must be faster. You must outlast them." Jonas pushed himself. Each time he felt like giving up. He thought of Lysa and his mother. He thought of his promise to return. He had to survive. Propaganda lectures were a daily occurrence. In a hall lined with banners showing the Emperor's stern face, the recruits listened to speeches about the glory of serving in the Imperial Guard. A preacher explained that the Emperor sacrificed his own body to protect humanity, so everyone owed him their lives. The preacher read from holy texts and demanded that recruits believe that dying in his name was the highest honor. Jonas felt nothing. If the Emperor cared about people like him, why did he allow such suffering? The words seemed hollow to Jonas, but he dared not show his doubts. As days turned into weeks, Jonas's body adjusted to the harsh training, but his mind remained anxious. The training was relentless. Mistakes were punished with lashes or worse. One recruit fell asleep during a lecture. He was dragged outside and executed on the spot. The sound of the gunshot echoed across the training grounds. The message was clear. The guard did not tolerate weakness. During this time, a rumor swept through the barracks. It was said that a recruit from another unit had refused to follow an order. He didn't want to charge at a target dummy because it reminded him of his younger sibling. A commissar shot him in front of his squad. The rumor spread fear and anger. It showed that compassion had no place in the guard. Jonas thought about what he would do if faced with such a situation. He felt a tiny seed of rebellion growing in his chest. One night, as Jonas lay in his cot, he whispered to Milo, "Do you ever think about leaving?" Milo looked at him. "Leaving? Where would we go? The Imperium spans the galaxy. There is nowhere beyond it." Jonas sighed. "Maybe there are places where the Emperor's reach is weaker. Places where we could live without fighting." Milo shook his head. "You talk like a heretic," he whispered. "Don't say such things. Someone might hear you." Jonas fell silent. He stared at the ceiling and imagined a life outside the cycle of work and war. At the end of the second chapter, we see Jonas adjusting to military life, while hints of his inner conflict grow stronger. We also see the relentless indoctrination and harsh discipline that define the Imperial Guard. The hook comes from the rumor of a recruit being executed for compassion, and Jonas's quiet question about desertion. This sets up the next chapter, where Jonas will have to decide how far he is willing to go to preserve his humanity. Week after week, Jonas's squad trained. They learned the basics of warfare: shooting, marching, digging trenches, and charging with bayonets. As the training intensified, the recruits also learned about the enemies they would face. In the training halls, holoprojectors displayed images of monstrous aliens, orcs, green-skinned brutes who lived for battle, tyranids, giant creatures with razor-sharp claws, and chaos, twisted humans who worshipped dark gods. The instructors shouted, "These creatures want to destroy you and everything you love. You must be ready to kill them without hesitation." The recruits practiced storming bunkers. Their instructors set up wooden structures with sandbags and barbed wire. The recruits had to run across open ground while instructors fired low-power lascans above their heads. It was designed to simulate the terror of battle. "If you keep your head down, you will live," Sergeant Dallas shouted. Jonas ran, feeling the heat from the lasers passing over him. He dove into trenches and crawled through mud. He lifted himself up to charge again. His body ached, but he learned to move faster and react quickly. One day, the recruits were assembled on the parade ground for a special speech. Commissar Halbert strode to the front, his black coat billowing in the wind. He looked at the young faces before him and said, "You have been chosen to defend humanity. The Emperor relies on you. Fear and hesitation are the tools of our enemies. If any of you feel you cannot carry out your duty, speak now." A hush fell over the recruits. No one moved. Halbert waited a moment before continuing. "Good," he said, "because the punishment for cowardice is death." He turned and signaled to a soldier. The soldier brought forward a sack. Halbert dumped the sack's contents onto the ground. 20 severed hands tumbled onto the dirt. Gasps and cries came from the recruits. These hands belonged to soldiers who tried to run. Halbert said WH40K.LEXICA and UM.com. They lost their hands and their lives. Let this be a lesson. Jonas felt bile rise in his throat. He forced himself to stand straight and stare ahead. He saw fear and anger in the eyes of the recruits around him. Milo's face was pale. That night, they whispered in the dark. "Do you think it's true?" Milo asked. "Do they really do that?" Jonas answered softly. "I think they do worse." Milo shivered. They lay awake, listening to the sounds of the camp. As training progressed, the recruits spent time in the barracks learning first aid and survival skills. They were taught how to treat wounds, how to find clean water, and how to identify edible plants. Sergeant Dallas explained, "The enemy will try to cut you off from supplies. You must know how to survive behind enemy lines." Jonas absorbed every word. Knowledge could mean the difference between life and death. He learned how to splint broken bones, how to stop bleeding, and how to make a tourniquet. These skills would prove valuable later. During downtime, some recruits formed tight friendships. They played card games with tattered decks and told stories about their homes. A boy named Carol came from a distant hive near the equatorial mountains. He told tales of sunlit glaciers and forests. Jonas listened, fascinated. He didn't know such places existed. Another recruit, Sammy, had worked in the Hab Spires as a cleaner. He described tall rooms filled with nobility and luxury. "I wore gloves and polished silver plates," he said. "Now I wear boots and polish Alaskan." They all laughed, but there was bitterness in their voices. Through these stories, Jonas realized that the Imperium was vast and varied. Some worlds were covered in ocean. Others were made of ice or desert. Some were rich, and others were poor. He felt small and unimportant. Yet, he also felt a spark of curiosity. He wanted to see these places. He wanted to experience more than the inside of a hive and the training ground of a recruitment center. This curiosity sat alongside his fear, creating a conflict inside him. One afternoon, The recruits participated in a simulation. They were given a map of a ruined city and told to navigate through it under fire. The instructors had speakers that played gunfire and explosions. The recruits had to move from building to building, avoiding open streets. Jonas took the lead for his squad. He crouched low, signaling his friends to follow. He peeked around corners and ran when he thought it was clear. The simulation was intense, but it taught the recruits how to work together. Jonas felt a brief surge of pride when their squad completed the course without any casualties. During the simulation, a small accident happened. A recruit named Brick tripped and twisted his ankle. He fell to the ground, crying out. Jonas turned back to help him. Sergeant Dallas shouted, "Leave him. The enemy is closing in." Jonas hesitated. He looked at Breck's face, contorted in pain. He looked at his squad, ready to move. He heard the simulated gunfire growing louder. His heart raced. He stepped toward Brick. Suddenly, Dallas grabbed Jonas's shoulder. "If you go back," she hissed, "I will shoot you." "Brick is dead weight. Move on." Jonas froze. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to follow orders. Guilt weighed on him as he left Brick behind. The simulation ended. Brick was pulled aside, and his ankle was treated. But Jonas couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. That night, Jonas sat outside the barracks, looking up at the dim sky. He felt sick. He had left someone behind. Even though it was just a simulation, the guilt was real. Milo sat down next to him. "It's not your fault," Milo said. "They made you do it." Jonas shook his head. "I didn't have to listen. I could have helped." Milo shrugged. "Maybe. But then we all would have been punished. Sometimes you have to follow orders to save others." Jonas frowned. "Do we? Or is that what they want us to believe?" These moments built tension inside Jonas. He saw how the guard valued obedience over compassion. He saw how people were reduced to tools. He began to question the system, even though he knew questioning was dangerous. The chapter ends with Jonas staring into the sky, wondering if he can remain human in a system that punishes compassion. The hook lies in his internal conflict and hints at the decision he will soon face. After weeks of intense training, the recruits were deemed ready for deployment. Jonas's unit boarded a shuttle that would take them to an orbiting transport ship. The shuttle's interior was cramped. 10 recruits sat facing each other, strapped into metal seats. The walls vibrated as the engines fired. Jonas felt his stomach lurch as the shuttle rose. Through a small window, he saw the hive shrinking below, becoming a speck among many. The transport ship was enormous. It looked like a floating city. Servitors guided the shuttle into a hangar. The recruits were marched off and herded into a cavernous hall filled with rows of stacked bunks. On the ship, they joined thousands of other soldiers. Jonas felt lost in the crowd. The smell of sweat, metal, and recycled air filled the corridors. Loudspeakers crackled with orders and prayers. Commissars and priests moved among the ranks, inspecting uniforms and leading chants. Jonas tried to keep track of Milo, but they were separated during the chaos. He ended up in a section with strangers from different planets. Some looked like they came from desert worlds, their skin darkened by the sun. Others were pale, with hair like straw. Jonas realized how vast the Imperium was and how little he knew of it. During the voyage, instructors continued to drill the recruits. They practiced boarding manoeuvres, learned about shipboard emergencies, and spent hours cleaning equipment. They were told they would land on a planet called Dorn's Landing. "You will be defending a strategic Promethium refinery from Chaos forces," a sergeant explained. Jonas's stomach tightened. Chaos. Those were the twisted cultists he had seen in training images. He wondered what they looked like up close. The journey lasted several days. When they arrived, the soldiers were ordered to prepare for drop. Jonas and his squad squeezed into a drop pod, a metal cylinder with harnesses attached to the walls. The pod rocked violently as it descended through the atmosphere. Jonas gripped his harness until his knuckles turned white. The air grew hot, and the metal creaked. There was a loud bang, then silence. The pod slammed into the ground. The doors blew open, and sunlight and dust filled the compartment. Jonas unbuckled and stumbled out, blinking. He felt the heat of Dorn's Landing's harsh sun on his face. The landing zone was chaos. Shells exploded in the distance. Laskin beams and tracer rounds zipped through the air. Officers shouted orders. Jonas's squad was told to move forward and dig in. They found a slight ridge and began shoveling furiously. Dirt flew as they created a shallow trench. Jonas's hands blistered within minutes. He tried to ignore the pain. He heard the distant roar of engines. He glanced up and saw smoke on the horizon. Chaos cultists were approaching. The cultists emerged from the smoke like a swarm. They wore ragged robes painted with symbols of dark gods. Some carried rusty autoguns. Others wielded axes and knives. They screamed prayers to their masters, voices distorted by fear and madness. Behind them, Jonas could see banners with disturbing symbols. The officers shouted, "Hold your fire until they are in range." Jonas's heart pounded. Sweat dripped down his forehead. He looked at Milo, who had managed to find his squad. Milo gave him a quick nod. They raised their lost guns. At the order, the squad fired. Red beams of coherent light shot toward the cultists. Some cultists fell, but many kept coming. They seemed not to care about their own lives. Jonas aimed at a man whose face was twisted with scars. He squeezed the trigger. The beam hit the man in the chest. He stumbled and dropped. Jonas felt shock. He had just killed someone, but there was no time to process. The cultists reached the trench. They jumped in, swinging axes. Jonas thrust his bayonet forward. It pierced a cultist's stomach. The man fell, blood spraying. Jonas pulled his blade free and stabbed again. His mind emptied. He moved on instinct. Round him, his comrades fought fiercely. Some screamed curses. Others cried in fear. Milo shot a cultist who had climbed over the trench wall. Another recruit swung his rifle like a club. Jonas heard someone shout, "Grenade!" He ducked as an explosion shook the ground. Dirt and rocks rained down. When the smoke cleared, Jonas saw bodies on both sides. The cultists were retreating. They dragged their wounded. The soldiers panted, adrenaline still coursing through their veins. Jonas looked down at his hands. They were covered in blood. His own brothers? It didn't matter. He felt numb. Night fell quickly. The soldiers tried to rest in the trenches. They used their packs as pillows and draped themselves with tarps. Jonas stared at the sky. On Dorn's landing, the stars were bright. They did not twinkle because the planet's atmosphere was thin. Jonas could see the outline of the planet's twin moons. He thought of home. Did his mother see the same stars? Did she know he was still alive? He pulled out his note. The cloth was damp with sweat. He reread his words and felt a wave of homesickness. He tucked the cloth away and closed his eyes. But he did not sleep the next morning. The officers announced an assault. Jonas's squad would lead a charge across open ground to capture a fortified position. Jonas's heart dropped. Charging meant leaving the safety of the trench and running toward enemy fire. He looked at his comrades. Some stared at the ground. Others clenched their jaws. Milo whispered, "We'll be okay. Just run fast." Jonas nodded, but fear gripped him. He remembered the stories of men being gunned down in no man's land. He thought about the rumor that compassion was punished. He wondered if he could stay human in the midst of this. When the whistle blew, Jonas climbed out of the trench. He ran forward, legs pumping. The ground shook as shells exploded. Laskin beams crisscrossed the battlefield. Jonas saw people fall. He kept running. He reached a crater and dove in. He felt the shock wave of an explosion nearby. He looked up and saw a young soldier lying on the ground, his leg blown off. The soldier screamed for help. Jonas's mind raced. He knew he was supposed to keep moving, but the man's cry tore at his heart. He remembered Brick in the simulation. He couldn't leave another person to die. Jonas made a choice. He crawled toward the wounded soldier. Bullets whizzing overhead. He grabbed the man's arm and dragged him into the crater. The soldier's leg was mangled, bleeding heavily. Jonas ripped a piece of cloth from his uniform and tied it tightly above the wound. "Stay alive," he whispered. The man nodded, tears streaming down his face. Jonas looked back toward his own line. He saw a commissar striding forward, bolt pistol drawn. The commissar's eyes locked onto Jonas. "Recruit!" The commissar shouted. "Leave him and move!" Jonas shook his head. "I can't leave him," he shouted back. The commissar's face darkened. He raised his pistol. Jonas's heart pounded. He had defied an order. He had shown compassion. Would he die for this? The moment hung between them like a thread. The commissar's finger tightened on the trigger. Jonas could see his own death in the barrel of the gun. He closed his eyes and waited. The hook at the end of this chapter is clear. Jonas has defied a direct order to save a wounded soldier. The commissar's pistol is pointed at him. The reader is left wondering whether Jonas will be executed or spared. The chapter also shows the full brutality of war, the chaos of battle, the numbness that follows, and the desperate choices soldiers must make. It deepens Jonas's internal conflict between obeying orders and preserving his humanity. The blast never came. At the last second, another officer grabbed the commissar's arm. "We need every man, Commissar," the officer said. The commissar lowered his pistol reluctantly, but leaned close to Jonas, eyes burning. "You defied a direct order," he hissed. "You're not worth the bullet it would take to execute you. But you will pay. The Emperor will see to that." Jonas swallowed, his throat dry. He knew he was in trouble. He also knew that if he had left the wounded soldier, he would have been haunted forever. Jonas dragged the man to the medic station. A Medicaid team took over, amputating the leg and injecting painkillers. The soldier squeezed Jonas's hand. "Thank you," he whispered. Jonas nodded. He returned to his unit, head spinning. The following day, Jonas and Milo were summoned to a disciplinary hearing. They stood before a panel of officers and commissars. The room was bare except for a table, chairs, and a large Imperial aquila on the wall. Commissar Helbrecht sat at the center. He read the charges. Recruit 247F, also known as Jonas, is accused of disobeying a direct order and endangering his unit. Jonas felt his palms sweat. He glanced at Milo, who looked terrified. Commissar Helbrecht continued, "Normally, the punishment for disobedience under fire is death. However, due to the needs of the Emperor's armies and the intervention of Lieutenant Vereen, we will not execute you. Instead, you are assigned to the Penal Legion." He pronounced the words with a slight smile, as if enjoying Jonas's shock. Jonas did not know much about the Penal Legions. He had heard rumors. He knew they were made up of criminals, deserters, and those who had failed the guard. They were used as expendable troops. They were sent on the most dangerous missions. The legions were a place where people were sent to die. Commissar Helbrecht explained further. "You will be stripped of your rank. You will be fitted with an explosive slave collar WH40K.LEXICA&UM.com. If you disobey again, your head will be blown off. If you run, you will die. If you fight bravely, you may earn a chance at redemption WH40K.LEXICA&UM.com. But most of you will not live that long." Two guards seized Jonas. They shaved his head and tattooed a black skull on his forehead. Jonas flinched as the needle drove ink into his skin. A tech priest approached, a mechanical spider of a man with metal arms and glowing eyes. In his hands, he carried a heavy metal collar. He muttered a prayer to the machine spirit, then placed the collar around Jonas's neck. Jonas felt the cold metal touch his skin. He heard a click as it locked. The collar was heavy. It hummed with power. Jonas knew there were explosives inside. He touched it and felt a slight vibration. His life was now literally in someone else's hands. Milo stepped forward, tears in his eyes. "Commissar, he saved a man," Milo said. "He deserves praise, not punishment." Halbrecht's gaze hardened. "He disobeyed an order," he replied. "Compassion is weakness. Weakness endangers the Imperium. Do you want to join him?" Milo shook his head quickly. He stepped back. Jonas felt anger and disappointment. He understood Milo's fear, but he also felt alone. Jonas was taken to a separate camp, far from his old unit. The camp was grim. It was surrounded by barbed wire and guarded by watchtowers. The prisoners lived in pits covered with metal grates. There were no beds, just mud and straw. They ate thin gruel and stale bread. The penal legionnaires were a mix of criminals. Some had been murderers. Others were thieves. A few had merely spoken against a governor or refused an order. One man, gaunt with hollow eyes, whispered to Jonas, "I told my colonel that his plan was wrong. He put me here." Another, a mutant with a twisted arm, muttered, "I was born like this. They said my body was a sin." WH40K.LEXICA&UM.com. Jonas listened. He realized that not everyone here was evil. Many were victims of circumstance. A guard explained the rules. He held up a small device with buttons. "These buttons control your collars," he said. "If you disobey, run, or attack an officer, we press a button. The collar will detonate inward." WH40K.LEXICA&UM.com. You will die instantly. If you fight bravely, you might earn a pardon. WH40K.LEXICA&UM.com. But don't count on it. He smiled cruelly. "You are expendable." Jonas sat in the mud that night and stared at the ground. The collar was heavy. It chafed his skin. It hummed like a heartbeat. He thought about his mother and Lysa. He thought about the soldier he had saved. Was that soldier still alive? Did he tell anyone about Jonas's courage? Jonas doubted it. In the Imperium, acts of compassion were buried. Only obedience mattered. Life in the penal camp was brutal. The prisoners drilled under constant supervision. They were given old laskins that often jammed. They cleaned and repaired them meticulously. They dug trenches and filled sandbags. They moved heavy ammunition boxes. They were given less food and water than regular soldiers. The collars made them compliant. If one man lagged, the guard would threaten to push the button. The fear of instant death kept everyone moving. Despite the oppression, a sense of camaraderie grew among the prisoners. They shared stories and jokes, even in whispers. Jonas made a friend named Silas, a trader who had been arrested for smuggling. Silas had a quick wit and a sharper mind. "I was caught because I trusted the wrong person," he said. "Now I'm here with you." "We both trusted the wrong people," Jonas nodded. He felt a little less alone. One day, the prisoners were ordered to clear a minefield. They were given long metal rods and told to find and mark mines. Jonas knew this was a death sentence for some. He stepped forward anyway, because refusing would mean the collar. He plunged his rod into the ground slowly. He felt a soft click. He stopped. He called over a sapper, who disarmed the mine. Jonas's heart pounded. He wiped sweat from his forehead. He kept moving. Each step was a gamble. He knew that if he made a mistake, he and those near him could die. At the end of the day, several prisoners had been killed by explosions. The guards shrugged. "That's why you're here," one said. Later that week, the Penal Legion was told to attack a small enemy outpost. The prisoners were the first wave. They ran across open ground while enemy guns fired. People fell around Jonas, shot down by autoguns. Jonas gritted his teeth. He aimed and fired at figures in the outpost. He reached a wall and pressed his back against it. Ral, a tall man who had been convicted of murder, was next to him. Ral's shoulder had been hit. He was bleeding. "Leave me," Ral gasped. Jonas thought back to the man he saved and the punishment he received. He hesitated. He looked around. The guards were busy. He tore a strip from his sleeve and wrapped Ral's wound. He dragged Ral behind a pile of sandbags. "Stay here," Jonas said. He expected his collar to explode. It didn't. He realized the guards hadn't seen him. He went back to the fight. "Ral survived that night," Silas whispered. "You did it again. You helped someone. You're either brave or foolish." Jonas smiled weakly. "Maybe both," he replied. He knew he hadn't learned his lesson. He knew he would always help, even if it meant his own death. The chapter ends with Jonas still in the penal camp, still wearing his collar, still fighting for others. The hook is the question. Will Jonas survive long enough to earn a pardon, or will his compassion be his undoing? Weeks turned into months. Jonas's Penal Legion fought battle after battle. They were thrown at the most fortified positions, forced to clear the way for regular troops. The collars kept them in line. Many died. Each time a friend died, Jonas felt a piece of himself crumble. Yet, he continued to fight, not because he believed in the cause, but because he wanted to survive and because he felt responsible for those around him. One morning, the prisoners were assembled in the main yard. Commissar Halbert stood on a platform with a small control box in his hand. "Today, you will storm a stronghold," he announced. "Your job is to draw the enemy's fire, to make them reveal their positions, and to die if necessary. In return, I might grant pardons to those who survive." He smiled. Jonas felt his stomach drop. He looked at Silas and Ral. They both looked grim. Silas muttered, "He says might. He enjoys playing gods with our lives." The stronghold was a former refinery built into a hill. It had high walls, reinforced gates, and gun turrets. The approach was across open ground. The plan was simple. The Penal Legion would run forward, drawing fire, while the regular troops would flank and then storm in. Jonas wondered how many of them would survive. He knew the answer, not many. But he also knew that this mission could be his chance at freedom. If he fought well, maybe Halbert would unlock his collar. WH40K.lexica and um.com. The signal came. The prisoners charged. They ran across mud churned by previous battles. The air was filled with screams, the roar of heavy bolters, and the crackle of laskins. Jonas's heart hammered. He zigzagged, trying to make himself a hard target. Around him, men fell, blown apart by explosives. He reached the wall and pressed himself against it. Above, an auto turret whirred and searched. Jonas looked around. He needed to find a weakness. Then he saw it, a drainage pipe near the ground, just big enough for a person. Water trickled out of it. Jonas pointed. "There," he shouted to Silas and Ral. They nodded. Jonas pried off the grate. It was rusty and came away easily. He slipped inside, crawling through muck. It smelled of rot. He heard the sounds of gunfire outside, muffled by the pipe. The pipe opened into a small room inside the stronghold. Two chaos cultists stood by a table, loading ammunition belts. Jonas raised his laskin and fired twice. The cultists fell. Silas and Ral crawled out behind him. They moved through the corridors, taking out enemies quietly. Each time they encountered a group, Jonas would signal, and they would ambush them. They fought through the halls, eventually reaching the main gate mechanism. Jonas threw a grenade at the control panel. Sparks flew, and the gate groaned open. Outside, regular guard troops saw the gates open and charged. The defenders were overwhelmed. After hours of intense fighting, the stronghold fell. Smoke hung in the air. Bodies, human and otherwise, lay everywhere. Jonas leaned against a wall, breathing heavily. Commissar Halbert strode into the hall. He looked around at the carnage and nodded. He approached Jonas. "You did well," he said, his tone begrudgingly respectful. "You showed initiative. The Emperor rewards bravery." He pulled out a small key. Jonas's heart leaped. Halbert unlocked Jonas's collar. It clanked to the ground. Jonas felt a weight lift from his neck. His skin tingled. He hadn't realized how heavy the collar was until now. He took a deep breath and felt truly alive for the first time in months. Halbert turned to Silas and Ral and unlocked their collars as well. "You are granted a partial pardon," he said. "Serve 2 more years in the regular guard, and you will be free. If you try to run or disobey, you will be shot. Do not waste this chance." Jonas nodded. Tears burned his eyes. He had survived the inferno. He had earned a chance at freedom. Later, Jonas sat by a small fire outside the captured stronghold. He looked at his hands. They were calloused and scarred. He thought about all the battles, all the faces that had fallen. He thought about the soldier he had saved, the man he had bandaged, the men he could not save. He wondered if they would be remembered. He doubted it. The Imperium used people like tools. But Jonas promised himself he would remember. He would carry their stories with him. The chapter ends with Jonas holding his collar, now unlocked, in his hands. It is a symbol of his past, of the power others had over him, and of his own strength in surviving. The hook is what comes next. Jonas is not fully free yet. He must serve 2 more years. Will he make it? Will he return home? And what will he do with his newfound understanding of the Imperium's cruelty? After the battle at the stronghold, Jonas and his friends were transferred to a regular Imperial Guard regiment. They were given new uniforms, cleaner, better fitting, without the black skull tattoo on the forehead. Still, the shadow of their past hung over them. Some soldiers whispered when they walked by. "Penal Legion," they said under their breath. Jonas heard the whispers and felt the stares. He tried not to let it bother him. He knew he had earned his place. He had survived and fought bravely. He had earned the right to be there. Jonas's new regiment was stationed on Dorn's Landing for several months. They fought skirmishes against Chaos warbands and defended supply lines. The regiment's commanding officer, Colonel Rield, was a strict but fair man. He made no secret of Jonas's past, but he also made it clear that he valued competence over reputation. "I don't care where you came from," he said one day, addressing the regiment. "If you follow orders and fight well, you are one of us." His words eased some of the tension. Slowly, Jonas and his friends integrated into their new unit. Jonas proved himself in battle. During one engagement, the regiment was ambushed by orcs, green-skinned creatures with roaring voices and crude weapons. The orcs charged, firing heavy sluggers and swinging big axes. Some soldiers panicked. Jonas grabbed a heavy bolter, a large machine gun mounted on a tripod, and set it up behind a barricade. He fed ammunition belts through it and fired. The heavy bolter roared, spitting explosive rounds. Orcs were ripped apart. The noise was deafening. Jonas kept firing, moving the barrel to cover different angles. His actions gave the regiment time to regroup. They rallied and pushed back the orcs. After the battle, Colonel Rield approached Jonas. "Well done, guardsman," he said. The words meant more to Jonas than he expected. He was being judged on his actions now, not his past. Despite his successes, Jonas could not fully relax. He still wrote letters to his mother and to Lysa, though he had no idea if they would be delivered. He wrote about what he had seen, about the people he had met, and about his hopes. "I am still alive," he wrote. "I hope you are too. I don't know when I can come home, but I will try." He signed the letters with love and folded them carefully. He handed them to the unit's mail clerk, who stuffed them into a bag. Jonas never received a reply. In his free time, Jonas and Silas would sit outside their tent and talk about the future. 2 years, Silas would say. 2 more years, and we're free. I'm going to find my family. I'm going to start a small trading business and never get caught again. Jonas smiled. "I want to see the oceans," he said. "I've heard of worlds covered entirely in water. I want to swim in the open sea." Silas laughed. "You swim. You'll sink like a rock." They both laughed until tears rolled down their faces. Laughter was rare. They cherished it. Jonas's unit was eventually rotated off Dorn's Landing and sent to another war zone. They fought on jungle worlds where vines hid deadly creatures. They fought on ice worlds where the cold could kill as surely as bullets. They fought on orbital stations where every step was taken in zero gravity. Jonas learned to adapt. He became a competent soldier. He still wasn't sure if he believed in the Emperor or the Imperium, but he believed in staying alive and in protecting his friends. During one battle on a frozen world, Jonas's squad was trapped by enemy snipers. They huddled behind a low wall, snow swirling around them. Jonas felt the cold seep through his boots. He knew they couldn't stay. He looked at the map, then at the terrain. He spotted a narrow trench leading to a ridge. He signaled to his squad. "Follow me," he said. They crawled through the snow, staying low. Bullets whizzed overhead. Jonas led them along the trench, then up the ridge. From there, they flanked the enemy snipers and took them out. The move saved lives. After the battle, an officer praised Jonas's quick thinking. "You've got a good head for tactics," the officer said. Jonas nodded, feeling proud. He had taken initiative and it had worked. The time passed slowly but surely. Jonas marked the days on a small piece of cloth. Each mark brought him closer to freedom. He tried not to think about the past, but sometimes memories surfaced. He remembered the collar round his neck. He remembered the buzz of its power. He remembered the weight. He touched his neck sometimes, expecting to feel metal. He felt only skin. He was free. Yet, the scars remained. They were invisible, but they were there. At the end of 2 years, Jonas was summoned to the command tent. Colonel Rield handed him a parchment sealed with the Imperial Aquila. "This document states that you have fulfilled your service and are officially released from the Imperial Guard," Rield said. Jonas took the parchment. His hands shook. The colonel looked at him kindly. "Where will you go?" he asked. Jonas shrugged. "I don't know," he said. "Home, if I can. Somewhere else, if I can't." Rield nodded. "Wherever you go, remember that you served with honor." Jonas nodded. He left the tent. Parchment clutched tightly. As he walked through the camp, soldiers saluted him. Jonas saluted back. He felt a strange mix of pride and sadness. He had survived. He had earned his freedom. But so many hadn't. He looked up at the sky. It was a deep blue on this world. The air was fresh and cold. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He felt the sun on his face. He was alive. The chapter ends with Jonas walking out of the camp, free at last. The hook is what comes next. Jonas must decide where to go and what to do with his new freedom. He carries physical and emotional scars. He is no longer the boy from the hive. How will he reconcile his past with his future? Jonas decided not to return to his hive immediately. He wasn't sure if it would be safe. Deserters were often punished, and his record was complicated. Instead, he set out on a journey across the sector. He traveled on transport ships, bartering his labor for passage. He visited worlds that were nothing like his hive. On one agri-world, endless fields of grain swayed under a bright sun. Jonas stepped into the field and felt the soft earth beneath his boots. He ran his fingers through the stalks. He felt a surge of joy. He helped farmers harvest grain and sleep under the stars. He ate fresh bread. He felt more at peace than he had in years. On another world, he climbed mountains that pierced the clouds. The air was thin and cold. He looked down from the peak and saw rivers winding like silver threads through green valleys. He camped with a group of miners who had carved homes into the cliffs. They shared tales of the minerals they extracted and the dangers they faced. Jonas listened. He realized that life outside the guard was still hard, but it was different. It had variety. It had beauty. Jonas also visited shrine worlds, where cathedrals towered over cities and pilgrims filled the streets. He watched processions of robed priests carrying relics. He stood in crowds of thousands and listened to sermons. He heard people cry out prayers. He felt out of place. In the quiet corners of the cathedrals, he thought about faith. He wondered if the emperor really listened. He wondered if he cared. He still didn't know what he believed, but he did know that people needed hope. Faith gave them that hope, even if it wasn't always grounded in reality. On a small moon at the edge of the sector, Jonas found something unexpected. It was a settlement of freedmen. They were former slaves, penal legionnaires, and refugees from war. They had banded together to build a new life away from the Imperium's control. They lived in simple huts made of wood and metal. They farmed the land, raised animals, and helped each other. They did not have much, but they had freedom. Jonas was welcomed by an elder named Maren, a woman with white hair and bright eyes. "We don't ask about the past here," she said. "We only look to the future." Jonas felt a warmth spread through him. Maybe he had finally found a place to rest. Jonas stayed in the settlement for months. He worked in the fields. He learned to plant and harvest. He learned how to mend tools and how to build fences. He discovered a skill for carpentry, carving simple chairs and tables. He felt his hands grow calloused in a different way from holding a gun. He laughed with children. He ate meals with his neighbors. He went to sleep under a roof that he helped build. He felt safe. The people there told stories in the evenings around a fire. Each person took turns, sharing tales of the places they had been and the things they had seen. Jonas listened for a long time. He absorbed the stories like a sponge. He felt his own story bubbling up inside him, waiting to be told. One night, Maren turned to him and said, "You have been here long enough, Jonas. Will you share your story?" Jonas hesitated. He looked at the fire, its flames dancing. He thought about the collar, the hive, the battles. He thought about his mother, about Lysa, about Milo. He drew a deep breath. Jonas began to speak. He started at the beginning, describing life in the hive. He spoke of the factory floors where children cleaned chemical vats, and mutants were treated like slaves. WH40K.LEXICA and UM.com. He described the fear of conscription and the rumor that turned into reality. He told them how the soldiers came and how the commissar called his number. He described the feeling of leaving his mother and the promise he couldn't keep. He told them about the training, the lashes, the severed hands, the propaganda. He told them about his first battle and the moment he chose to save a wounded comrade. He described the disciplinary hearing, the shaving of his head, and the heavy collar that hummed around his neck. He spoke of the minefields and the Penal Legion, of Silas and Rao, of the stronghold and the explosion that killed his fear. He described the moment Halbrecht unlocked his collar. He told them about the 2 years in the regular guard, about fighting works, about frozen trenches and jungle ambushes. He told them about receiving his pardon and walking out of the camp. He told them about his journey, the fields of grain, the mountains, the cathedrals, and finding them. Jonas's voice did not waver. He spoke simply and clearly, as if reciting facts. Yet, every listener felt the weight of his words. Some cried, others clenched their fists. When he finished, there was silence. Maren nodded. "Thank you," she said. "We needed to hear that. We need to remember that the Imperium is built on our back. SWH40K.LEXICA and UM.com. But we also need to remember that we can find each other and help each other." A young man named Bren stood up. "We should fight back," he said. "We should attack the Imperium." Jonas shook his head. "Fighting the Imperium head-on is suicide," he said quietly. "They are too strong. But we can survive. We can build places like this, where people can live free and support each other. That is our rebellion." The chapter ends with Jonas watching the stars above the settlement. He feels peace for the first time. The hook comes from the idea that sharing stories can heal and that small acts of kindness can defy a cruel system. Jonas's story is no longer just his. It is part of a collective memory that helps the freedmen feel less alone. What will Jonas do with this piece? Will he stay forever or continue traveling? These questions lead into the final chapter. Jonas decided to stay on the moon for a while longer. He helped the settlement build a small school so the children could learn to read and write. He taught them simple maths and told them stories about other worlds. He carved toys out of wood. He felt a sense of purpose. But he also felt restless. He knew there were other worlds where people suffered. He wondered if he could help them. He wasn't a hero. He was just one man. But he had survived the worst the Imperium had thrown at him. Maybe his survival meant something. One day, a trader arrived at the settlement. He brought goods from nearby worlds, fresh cloth, tools, and news. Jonas listened eagerly to the trader's stories. The Imperium was still at war. Of course it was. The Imperium would always be at war. But there were pockets of resistance, places where people hid from conscription, where Penal legionnaires fled. The trader mentioned a planet where an old Imperial base had been abandoned. Freedmen had taken it over and turned it into a haven. "It's dangerous to reach," the trader said. "There are patrols and pirates. But it's free." Jonas felt a pull. He wanted to go. He talked to Maren about it. "Should I leave?" he asked. Maren smiled gently. "You can do whatever you feel is right," she said. "You have given us your story. You have helped us. If you feel there are others who need you, go. We will survive." Jonas nodded. He packed his few belongings. He said goodbye to the children, to Silas, to Ral, and to Maren. He walked to the trader's ship. He looked back at the settlement one last time. He felt a pang of sadness. He also felt hope. He had been given freedom. He would use it. The journey to the haven was perilous. Pirates boarded the trader's ship. Jonas fought with a knife and a las pistol, protecting the trader's goods. They were nearly caught by an Imperial patrol. Jonas hid under crates, heart pounding. Eventually, they reached a small, rocky world with an old fortress. The fortress's walls were pockmarked with old blast craters. People had patched holes with scrap metal and wood. Guards watched from makeshift towers. When Jonas arrived, they questioned him. "Why are you here?" they demanded. Jonas told them his story. They led him inside the fortress. Jonas found a community similar to the one on the moon. People worked, laughed, and lived freely. They had built a school, a medicae room, and communal kitchens. Former soldiers trained younger people to defend the base if needed. Jonas was welcomed. He was given a small room and a job to do. He joined the watch, scanning the skies for Imperial patrols. He helped teach children. He told his story again. Each time he told it, it became easier. Each time, he felt the burden of it lift a little more. One evening, Jonas sat on the fortress wall, looking up at the stars. The air was cool. He thought about all the people he had met. He thought about Lysa. He wondered if she was alive. He thought about his mother. He wondered if she had received his letters. He realized he would probably never know. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer not to the Emperor, but to the people he had lost. "I won't forget you," he said softly. He felt a tear run down his cheek. A young girl approached. She was about the age Jonas had been when he was taken. She held a wooden toy he had carved. "Jonas," she asked, "why do you tell your story?" Jonas looked at her. He smiled. "Because stories matter," he said. "When we share our stories, we remember who we are. We remember that we are not alone. And maybe, if enough people hear them, things will change." The girl nodded. She hugged the toy. She ran off to play. Jonas watched her and felt warmth. He felt his purpose. He would keep telling his story. He would keep listening to others. He would help build pockets of freedom wherever he could. The chapter ends with Jonas realizing his new role. He is not a soldier anymore. He is a storyteller, a builder, a teacher. He knows he cannot topple the Imperium, but he can make small changes. He can help people survive and remember. The hook is the understanding that change can come from stories and communities, even in the face of a galaxy-spanning empire. Years later, Jonas's hair had grown gray. His hands were calloused from years of work rather than battle. He had traveled from haven to haven, settlement to settlement, sharing his story and listening to others. He had helped build schools, farms, and small defenses. He had carved toys and furniture. He had learned how to grow crops and how to fix machines. He had never returned to his hive. He had always felt that going back would be dangerous. He had never stopped thinking about his mother and Lysa. He had never found out what happened to them. One day, a convoy of refugees arrived at Jonas's current settlement. They were exhausted, their clothes torn, their faces gaunt. Among them was a woman with lines on her face and sharp eyes. Jonas's heart skipped. "Lysa," he whispered. The woman turned. Their eyes met. Recognition blossomed. Jonas ran forward and embraced her. Lysa hugged him tightly. They held each other, tears streaming down their faces. "I thought you were dead," Lysa said. "I thought I'd never see you again." Jonas laughed and cried at the same time. "I thought the same," he said. They stood there, holding on, as the settlement bustled around them. They sat by the fire that evening, catching up. Lysa told Jonas that she had been drafted too. She had served in a different regiment. She had fought on several worlds, been wounded, and finally been discharged. She had returned to the hive, only to find that it had been damaged by a reactor failure. Many people had died. She could not find Anna. Lysa had joined a group of refugees looking for safety. They had been traveling for months when they stumbled upon this settlement. Jonas felt a mix of happiness and sorrow. He had found Lysa, but he did not know if his mother was alive. Still, the reunion brought him comfort. It showed him that the world was unpredictable, but sometimes it brought unexpected gifts. As the years continued, Jonas and Lysa worked together. They built a school in the settlement. They taught children to read, write, and understand numbers. They told stories about the Imperium, about freedom, about the importance of compassion. They taught them that they had value beyond their work. They taught them to dream. They used simple words and simple lessons. They encouraged questions. They celebrated curiosity. Jonas watched the children grow. He saw them smile. He saw them play. He saw them learn. He felt hope. Old legends grew around Jonas. People called him the man who refused to abandon a comrade. They told his story to new rivals. Some details changed, some were exaggerated, but the core remained. Jonas had chosen compassion over obedience, and he had survived. His story became a whisper of hope in the darkness. It showed that even in the Imperium, small acts of kindness could ripple outward. They could inspire others to help instead of harm. One evening, Jonas sat with Lysa and Silas on a hill overlooking the settlement. They watched the sunset, coloring the sky orange and pink. Lysa sighed. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked. Jonas nodded. "All the time," he said. "But if they had been different, maybe we wouldn't have found this." He gestured to the fields, the homes, the people working together. "We can't change the past," he said, "but we can shape the future." Silas chuckled. "From smuggler and factory worker to farmer and teacher," he said. "Who would have thought?" They all laughed out. As Jonas got older, he began to feel tired more easily. He slowed down. He spent more time carving toys and less time working in the fields. He listened to young people's stories and offered gentle advice. He wrote down his own story in a long scroll, hoping it would be passed on after he was gone. He believed stories were a weapon against forgetting. They were a way to fight without guns. They were a way to keep people human. One morning, as Jonas walked through the settlement, he saw a group of children clustered around something. He approached and saw they were reading from his scroll. One of them looked up and said, "Jonas, is this true?" Jonas smiled. "Yes," he said softly. "It is." The children nodded and went back to reading. Jonas felt his chest swell with pride. He had taken the worst parts of his life and turned them into lessons for others. He had made meaning out of pain. He felt content. The final chapter ends not with a dramatic battle, but with quiet, personal resolution. Jonas has found peace, family, and purpose. His story shows that even in a universe defined by war and cruelty, individuals can choose kindness, build communities, and teach others. The hook is a whisper of hope. If Jonas could survive, so can others. If Jonas could find freedom, maybe others can too. Each time his story is told, the whisper grows louder.